morning, everybody, and thank you for the invitation to present to you today. So my name's Jo Inchley. I'm based at the University of Glasgow in Scotland, and I lead an international study of adolescent health and wellbeing, the Health Behaviour in School-Aged Children study. And I'm going to be presenting this morning some of the findings from that research. The latest survey took place in 2021-22, and it represents the voices of almost 280,000 young people across Europe and Canada and Central Asia. So although I'm going to be presenting you lots of numbers, behind every number is a child sitting in the classroom telling us about their lives at school. So important to remember that. Next slide, please. So just by way of context, I'm sure all of us here today understand how important the school environment is, the school experience is for young people's health and well-being. So schools are an important setting, not just for academic learning and achievement, but also for health improvement, for early intervention, for prevention. Not just through the taught curriculum, but thinking also about the school ethos, the environment, the organisation, the structure. And research has shown us that when children feel like they belong at school, when they feel connected and feel safe at school, when there is an inclusive school environment, and when there's positive and supportive teacher-student relationships, then young people report much better mental health and other positive health outcomes. And in contrast, when there's high levels of exam pressure on children, when schools focus particularly on academic performance, as opposed to other more holistic aspects of learning, when children feel they're not achieving as much as their peers, and when there's high levels of peer-on-peer violence and aggression, then those things are all associated with poorer well-being outcomes for young people. So school has a critical role to play in children's development and in their health and well-being. Next slide, please. So just a little bit about the survey, HBSC. It's been conducted since the mid-1980s, early 1980s, and there's 51 countries and regions across Europe and North America now take part. Surveys are conducted in the classroom using a standard protocol so we can compare responses across all the countries that take part. And it focuses on the early adolescence, so late childhood, early adolescent years into mid-adolescence, so 11, 13 and 15-year-olds. In terms of the school environment, we ask about, next slide please, a number of different aspects of school. So questions on school satisfaction, how much they like school, questions on schoolwork pressure, support from teachers and from classmates, and also how much they've been bullied at school and whether they bully others at school. So these are some of the data that I'll be presenting today, just to give that overall context of how young people feel about school in Europe at the moment. So first of all, some trends in liking school. So these are, next slide, please. Yes. Yes, and I don't know how well you can see the numbers, apologies, but along the bottom are the years from 2002 through to 2022, so it spans a 20-year period, and up the side is the percentage who say they like school a lot. So overall, we found that around 1 in 4, 24% of adolescents say they like school a lot. So I'm not sure what that says about your vision for school to be a pleasurable and enjoyable place to be. We see very clear age-related differences. So the lighter lines here, so I should say for the boys are in blue and the girls are in orange, and the lighter lines are the younger children and the darker lines are the older children. That will be consistent through the slides. So at the top are the 11-year-old girls, so they like school the most, followed by the 11-year-old boys, and then as children get older, they like school less. I mean, so obviously for many of our countries, 11-year-olds are still at primary school, and then they move into secondary school, and that's where we see a big decrease in liking school. It's not true for every country in the study, but it is for a lot, and that might explain some of these age-related differences. So the most recent data, which is the final column, shows that only around 20% of 13 and 15-year-olds actually like school a lot. So this slide now shows similar data, but for the last 3 years. So on the left-hand side, we've got 2014, the middle is 2018, the right is 2022. And along the bottom are the age groups, so 11, 13, and 15. So what this shows more clearly, I think, is the age-related declines. So you can see for each of those 3 years, there's a really steep decline in liking school between age 11 and 13. And then a small decline then between 13 and 15. So that transitional stage, which also coincides with things like puberty, of course, and social transitions, then that's a critical point in terms of worsening experiences at school more generally. But you can also see from this slide that the gender gap is closing. So back in 2014, there was a bigger difference between boys and girls, but girls have now come down to the same level of boys, and there's very little difference in how they feel about school. Next slide, please. So this one shows trends in schoolwork pressure. So we asked how much children feel pressure from the schoolwork they have, and this is children who say they feel a lot or some pressure from schoolwork. So overall, 44% of young people reported some or a lot of pressure. But again, you can see differences by age and differences by gender. So the group reporting highest levels of schoolwork pressure are the 15-year-old girls. This is in 2022, followed by 13-year-old girls. And the 11-year-olds report the least, as we might expect. So we see this big increase with age, especially amongst the girls. And you can see that over the 20-year period, levels were relatively stable until 2018. And then in the last 4 years, we've seen this really quite steep increase, particularly amongst the older girls. Next slide, please. And so this one just again shows the age-related differences. So the marked increase with age from age 11 to 15, and how much steeper those age-related increases in schoolwork pressure are for girls, the orange line, compared with boys, the blue line. So the pressure on girls now, or reported by girls now, is also much higher than it was 8 years ago. So something's happening in the school system really affecting girls and how pressured and stressed they feel by the work they have to do. Next slide, please. So this is a slightly tricky slide to see. Sorry, it's quite far away. But basically, we did some additional analysis, which was published in the Journal of Youth and Adolescence. So we were looking at what factors at national level have changed over time and might explain some of the worsening trends in mental health. So because we've seen these increases in schoolwork pressure, we looked at whether that might explain some of the changes in mental health we've seen in recent years. And what that kind of box in orange shows, though you can't see it, is that as at a country level, where schoolwork pressure increased, we also saw increases in mental health problems amongst girls and boys, but particularly amongst girls. So schoolwork pressure was associated, or changes in schoolwork pressure were associated with changes in psychological problems reported by the children. We looked at other factors too, so family structure, internet use, and obesity. And the last two bars show marked effects for internet use and obesity as well, just for interest, but we were particularly focused on schoolwork pressure. So next slide, please. So what support is available to children in the school? Obviously, there's two clear sources, teachers and peers. So we looked first at teacher support, and we asked them how much they feel their teachers accept them as a person, care about them as a person, and how much trust they have in their teachers. And we create a kind of teacher support scale. So next slide, please. Here we can see the percentage reporting high teacher support in 2021-22 by age and gender. So you can see around 2/3 of boys and girls report high support from their teachers at age 11, but again, that drops off with age, so only about half of boys and less than that of girls at sort of secondary level report high support from teachers. So obviously the transition from primary also often marks the change from going from one class and one teacher to multiple classes, multiple teachers. So it's much more challenging for students then to have the opportunity to develop those good, trusted relationships with their teachers at that stage. If we go to the next slide, just in terms of how teacher support has changed in recent years, we've got boys in blue on the left and girls in orange on the right from 2014 through to 2022. Very stable amongst the boys, but again, you can see amongst the girls, particularly the last 4 years, we've seen a decline in those reporting high teacher support. So it may be that some of the disruption caused by COVID when schools were closed also disrupted those supportive relationships, and they've not really recovered, or at least they've had a more long-lasting effect on the girls compared with boys. Next slide, please. So similarly with classmate support, we have a classmate support scale, so how much they enjoy being together, whether classmates are kind and helpful, whether students accept them as they are. Next slide, please. And this is the results for high classmate support. Similar patterns to teacher support, bit higher levels amongst the older children in terms of classmate support, but again, sort of it does decline with age. And also by 13 and 15, there's a 10% difference between girls and boys, so boys more likely to be reporting higher support from classmates. So both teacher support and classmate support are lowest amongst 13 and 15-year-old girls. Next slide. Yeah, so these are just the trends again. Sorry, if you could go back one more. Thank you. So these are just the trends over time in classmate support. And again, we're seeing this decrease amongst the girls, but also a bit of a decrease amongst the boys. So things are going in the wrong direction. And we're seeing a bit of a perfect storm, particularly for older girls, where they're reporting a less satisfaction with school, higher pressure from school, and they're getting less and less support from their teachers and their classmates. So this may well be contributing to some of the trends that we're seeing around worsening mental health, for example. Next slide, thank you. And also just to look at the impact of socioeconomic status, because we know that these patterns are not equally distributed across the population, and poverty is a key driver of poorer health outcomes. So we use a measure in HBSC called family affluence, which is based on material assets within a child's home. And this basically shows the difference between the top 20% most affluent children and the bottom 20% least affluent children. So you can't see it very well on the slide, but those from a high affluence group are the coloured circles, and those from the low affluent groups are the empty circles. And basically what you can see is quite a mixed picture in regards to school experience. So there's no difference between affluence groups, so boys and girls, in relation to how much they enjoy school. And for boys, there's no real difference in relation to schoolwork pressure or teacher support. But we see higher levels of classmate support amongst boys from more affluent groups. And for girls, higher affluent girls report higher levels of schoolwork pressure, but they also have higher support from classmates. And in contrast, teacher support is actually slightly higher for those from the lowest affluence groups, which may be because they're getting some extra input and support. So moving on to bullying, and these just show some trends in bullying over time, 2014 to 2022. But overall, just over 1 in 10 adolescents said they had been bullied at school, 2 to 3 times a month in the past couple of months. So that's on average, but there is quite high cross-national variation, with highest levels in Lithuania, lowest levels in countries like Spain, France, and Denmark. Younger adolescents are more likely to have been bullied than older adolescents, and we see similar levels between boys and girls at each age, but there's evidence of a small increase amongst 13-year-old girls more recently. Next slide, please. And people often compare sort of bullying as traditional bullying, face-to-face bullying, with cyberbullying. There's a lot of concern about cyberbullying, obviously, in the media and the impact it's having on children. And for some children, it's having a persistent and pervasive impact on their lives. But you can see from this slide that actually face-to-face bullying is still more commonly reported by children in school than cyberbullying is. And moving on just in terms of bullying others. So we know that being a bully is just as bad for your health as actually being bullied in many instances. So bully perpetrators report much poorer outcomes than their peers who don't bully others. So if we look at trends in bullying others in the last couple of months, on average 1 in 5, just over 1 in 5, and sorry, just over 1 in 20, 6% said they had bullied others at school. So it's still a serious issue for young people. Boys are more likely to bully others than girls. Bullying others is highest among 15-year-old boys, but amongst girls, prevalence is highest at age 13. But we do see some evidence of a slight decline in recent years. And again, a lot of cross-national differences. So I've thrown a lot of data out at you, and I'm happy to answer questions on that later. But I just wanted to sort of use my last few slides to talk about the school environment. So what might be going wrong for young people? Clearly, there's things that they're not happy about. Clearly, they're not getting the support they might need. So what are the challenges, and what might be some of the ways forward? So some of the challenges, as far as I can see it, are, first of all, the inflexibility of the current school system. And I have to say a disclaimer that I'm talking probably quite a lot from the UK perspective here, and it would be useful to hear what other countries are like in relation to some of these issues. But one size does not fit all, but we're not very good necessarily within the school system of making allowances for different children. So, for example, in many cases, it's difficult to accommodate within the current system differing needs of children, whether that be neurodivergent children or highly anxious children, or other reasons why children may struggle within the current system. There's also an increasing push on focusing on academic outcomes to the detriment of a more inclusive education, as Christoph said, thinking about how to nurture that creativity in young people through the arts and other subjects. There's a move towards highly controlled environments within schools and strict behaviour policies. So that's things like in the UK at the moment, enforcing silence in corridors as children move from one classroom to another, strict uniform policies, and if your tie falls off in class, they have these stick-on ties, and they fall off, you're sent to detention. Rigid adherence to some of the rules and routines, and very quick penalties for doing something wrong, like forgetting a pen, for example. And they have these isolation rooms where if you have these multiple infringements, you're sent to isolation for hours in the day, which is not an opportunity for learning and social interaction. So we also see increasing absence rates in the UK, and I think this is true across many countries. PISA data shows that too. And this is just an example from a recent campaign focusing on attendance in the UK, which was massively criticised for really misunderstanding some of the reasons behind non-attendance at school, as if it was just a matter of getting your child into school and everything would be all right, and really failing to understand some of the issues that children are facing, which may make them struggle to attend school within the current system. So, a couple of other challenges. Teacher workload and stress is huge if they're not happy, difficult to create a happy classroom. And I just wanted to touch on this issue of safe spaces as well, if you move on to the next slide. So, how safe do children feel in school? And I think safety is a really fundamental issue for young people. And this is a nice bit of small qualitative work done in Wales, looking at safe spaces in primary and secondary. What places at school feel safe? So if I was to ask you, probably you would all come up with the same. Toilets and playgrounds don't feel that safe because bullying happens there. There can be intimidating spaces. And although places are busy and crowded and noisy, sometimes that's good for social interaction and friendship groups. But at the same time, pupils talked about the value of having quieter spaces that they could retreat to, have some time out when they needed it. And that was often places like the music room or the library or a classroom with a particular teacher that they could spend time safely with. So very quickly, creating a supportive school environment, what do we need to consider? Fostering positive supportive relationships, building knowledge, skills and competence, facilitating autonomy and agency, providing this safe environment for children, nurturing children's curiosity, creativity and confidence, moving towards a more holistic learning experience, ensuring pathways to support for those children that need it, and not forgetting the teachers, promoting and supporting their well-being as well. So I need to finish, and this is my final slide. So it's not about getting children, sorry if you move on to the next slide, please. It's not about getting children and young people into school no matter what, or blaming children and families when things go wrong. It has to be about creating a school system where all children and young people can feel safe and can thrive. So apologies for going over a little bit, but thank you for your